Hi, everybody. Today's April 10th, 2024. I'm honored to have with me my friend, Retsef Levi. And if I presume I got the name right, the pronunciation, I hope.
Yeah.
And we got to see each other very recently at a Jay Bhattacharya event at MIT. And, it seems to me that there's a kind of a power struggle going on to get the word out. And whether, truth seems to be filtered in various ways. I'm wondering what your experiences have been. What was the fight? We met a year ago, a little over. And what's been going on with your forays into the fight against, kind of vaccine authoritarianism in general.
So I think maybe there are a couple of things that are going on here. Maybe one of them is that I think that one would hope that facts would matter in debates, and unfortunately, they are more often than not. I think that facts just simply don't matter. I still have a lot of conversations with colleagues in different settings when we get to talk about, for example, the vaccines. And even now, I believe that many of them are not even aware of basic facts, let alone interpretation of the facts. But I'm talking about just the facts. So, for example, most people don't know that there is a paper published, peer-reviewed, that analyzed the clinical trials of Moderna and Pfizer, and found out that when you account for all for deaths, hospitalizations, and medical events that are life-changing for all reasons, COVID and not COVID, you find out that there are significantly more events like this in the vaccinated arm compared to the placebo, the control arm, which implies essentially that launching this vaccine for the entire population, like we've seen happening, is likely to cause more harm than benefits. So that's a fact. I just described a fact. And many people are not aware of this fact, although it's not even a speculation. It's mathematical analysis or statistical analysis of the data that was shared by the companies that run the trial. I can argue potentially what does it mean, what the fact means, but this is a fact that most people are not aware of. They are not aware of other facts that, for example, there are 3 studies in which people were tested just before and just after they received a dose of the COVID vaccine, the mRNA vaccines, and about 2 to 3% of the people that were tested after, their troponin level, which is one of the major biomarkers for heart muscle damage or heart attack, was elevated. Again, you might have different interpretation of these facts, but these are facts. And so I feel that more often than not, we either ignore basic facts or make up facts that are nothing more than just a statement, empty statement. And we tend to have debates based on moral classification of the other side rather than facts. And I think that you can sort of speculate why this is happening. I think that partially this is happening because very powerful forces, including governments, but also large corporations, have interests that the facts are not going to be known, and that instead there will be pseudo facts or narratives governing the discussion. And that's kind of very let me put it this way, that kind of raises in my mind very, very serious questions about how do we make sure that we have debates that are based on facts, because I think freedom of expression start by, okay, knowing what the facts are and sort of having the right set of facts in front of us. Um, they have to build, it has to build on a factual basis. If you take away the factual basis, then I think you're taking away, to a large degree, you're taking away the ability to have, debates. Sorry.
I also think there's some magical words that don't seem sacrosanct. I mean, the word vaccine, using the word vaccine on certain posts would get you banned at certain times or get you suppressed. And there seems to be a magical quality to vaccine. I think it somewhat coincides with the 1986 NCVIA, which was basically the granting of blanket immunity from liability to vaccines, so that we would not inhibit production thereof. There's a time when childhood vaccines numbered, I think, 6 to 8 or something like that. Now we are at dozens and working towards maybe 100 vaccines by the time a child is 15 or 16 or something like that. And everything seems to have banded into that realm. And this, most recent experiment with vaccination is probably the first time people had vaccines after the fact. So the whole concept of vaccination is to inoculate prior. This is kind of interesting etymology of the word vaccine. It actually refers to cows, because the vaccinia was the inoculum against tuberculosis, I believe. And oh no, I take that back, against smallpox. And so there was vaccinia became vaccine, and so we've had vaccines as a concept for hundreds of years, going the 18th century, but lately they become kind of no pun intended, kind of a sacred cow, and we can't talk about them because I think they represent an assured monopolistic-ish pipeline for pharmaceuticals, and with regulatory capture for a lot of people who make rules about those vaccines. So I think we're seeing a lot of treatments turn into vaccines, and cancer treatment and so forth might very well be in this category at some point, and it might very well work, but there's going to be various sinecures and so forth that are going to be carved out for these types of medications. So it just doesn't seem like there can be any rational talk when one party has kind of like a place that's held above.
Yeah, I think that they attempt to discuss vaccines as a concept instead of discussing specific vaccines is problematic, right? Because the same way we don't discuss antibiotics, or we don't discuss drugs against cancer, but we discuss a specific antibiotic, and more specifically, a specific antibiotics for a specific medical condition, and a specific cancer drug for a specific type of cancer. So I think that we should just continue to have a discussion about each vaccine with respect to the disease, the target disease of that vaccine, and really apply science-based criteria of benefits and risks. With, to me, the guiding principles should be, first, do no harm. Like you should first make sure that you don't harm people. And the reason why with vaccines it's even more important than other drugs is that vaccines is perhaps the only drug that we give to healthy people. It's the only drug that most of the time you give it before you're sick. Right now, yeah, there is rationale to do that, but we cannot forget the fact that we are giving it to someone that is healthy. So the threshold of ensuring that we are not going to cause harm has to be far more stringent than usual. For example, if I give a drug to a cancer patient that is maybe dying, clearly my threshold is not going to be the same, because if I don't give him or her anything, they're going to die. So it makes sense to take more risks. But to give a vaccine to a healthy child, that's a whole another story, right? Like you cannot compromise on making sure that it's very, very unlikely that you make that it's very unlikely that you don't cause harm. And the second thing is, and that's also striking, why in vaccines we are taking a completely different approach than maybe all other domains in medicine, which is the personalization. Like the entire medical field is going towards personalization, where basically the idea is we are not going to come with blanket treatments. We are going to come with treatments that are tailored to the specific individual and the specific characteristics of that individual and the disease that that individual has. And for some reason, we don't apply this principle at all when it comes to vaccines. I mean, here's an example that is very striking, even on with respect to the mRNA products. And I'm saying products because I think that there are many strong arguments why we should not consider those vaccines. But like, you know, we actually gave the same dose to a 12-year-old, to a 19-year-old, to a 50-year-old, regardless of their body mass, the weight, right? And a very potent material, right? Like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That
And
doesn't make
not
sense.
only was it potent, but it had never been tested. Not only had this quote unquote vaccine had never been tested, but the modality, the platform of mRNA as the transfer, as opposed to kind of the either the what I call freeze dried version. So let's just the Soviets and the Russians and the Chinese had Sinovac and Covax and whatnot, and India they kind of had a freeze dried version of just the virus itself, little bits of dried spike protein and whatnot. Fine, they injected that. There's some efficacy, but there's no real risk of it multiplying within your body. Then there were kind of the old style flu shot kind of vaccines, adenovirus, which Johnson & Johnson had and others. But no, those weren't good enough. We had to have this special new platform tested out, which had never been done on anybody ever before. My field of expertise partially is the Zika microcephaly kind of false pandemic, the overblown panic pandemic in Brazil. And something really unknown, it was even unknown to me when I wrote the book, was that there was a push for an mRNA platform for a putative Zika vaccine back in 2017 or so. And Bill Gates, volunteered $100 million to Moderna so they can make a Zika vaccine on the mRNA platform. I don't know what the big push for the mRNA is, except to carve the field, to kind of like lay the field for future profit. And maybe there will be some great benefit of tailored, quick to the gun. We genomically sequence your pancreatic, God forbid, one's pancreatic cancer, and we had a specific vaccine just for that. Blah blah blah. Okay, fine, all well and good, but that would come in due course, in due time. And again, as you say, the risk for that person is a totally different, situation. An 80-year-old or a 70-year-old with pancreatic cancer from a 7-year-old with nothing, and the whole, life expectancy and expectation of good health is totally different. A 7-year-old versus a 70-year-old, a 9-year-old versus a 90-year-old. And you're absolutely right. We kind of applied this across the board, one size fits all, in kind of a Mao suit, assimilation of conformity, and like the Maoists, make everyone go do it. Otherwise, they're not going to get fed. They're not going to get, keep their jobs and so forth. And we saw a huge reshuffling of the military and of society in general based on this kind of shibboleth of having to, bow down to the vaccine.
Yeah, I think with the mRNA, it's becoming clear, I think as time progresses, that this has been a technology that actually the government promoted as part of potentially a DoD program, and as part of a bioterror response. And when you develop technologies like that and you invest, hundreds of millions, and if not billions of government money into it, including through some investments in private companies, then you have a very strong desire to show that the technology is useful. And I think that potentially what happened is that once the pandemic broke up, and fear took over the world and maybe potentially was stimulated and was manipulated to, there were manipulations to increase the fear. I could see why people felt that that's an opportunity to expedite the dissemination of that technology. That, by the way, until that moment, failed every single clinical trial that it was tested, and it failed because of cumulative toxicity. I think that by now there is also growing evidence that taking the mRNA vaccines, the more you take them, there are more and more concerns that you potentially compromise your immune system. There are multiple studies, for example, that show that once you start to take the booster, and as you take more and more boosters, there's actually a shift in the antibody composition in your body. So just to kind of maybe explain to the listeners, we have different types of different parts of our immune system and different types of antibodies. Some of them are more generic and they are kind of general purpose, and some of them are more adaptive in the sense that they learn from exposure to pathogens to have a memory that the next time they can basically, when they see the pathogen, the body will be able to react. These are called adaptive. But also antibodies that you can find in the mucosal system. This is kind of our airways. This is typically the type of the immune system that prevent us from getting infected in the first place. This is something that actually, when you are naturally being infected by a virus, sort of you develop a very strong reaction in your airways, and children in particular have very strong mucosal immune system. That's why often children don't get severely ill by COVID. Most of the impact of the COVID vaccines, when they are injected, or the the mRNA products, they're injected to your blood, so they create actually immune response in your blood. So these are called humoral antibodies, but these antibodies have different types. So in fact, there are 4 types, where type 1 and type 3 are the ones that are supposedly more adaptive and effective in essentially protecting our body and eliminate the pathogen once they see it. The type 4 antibody is actually playing a very, very interesting role that people don't fully understand yet, but by and large, it actually does the opposite. It has the opposite effect, but it actually causes your immune system to be tolerate the pathogen, to not react to the pathogen. For example, when you are being exposed repeatedly to an allergen, that's actually the part of your immune system that will tell you, hey, you see gnats, but don't react to gnats. It's okay, because you've seen that enough times. What we see in people that actually were tested over time is after they received the boosters, and definitely if they got infected after the 3rd boosters and beyond, they start to have less antibodies of type 1 and 3 and more antibodies, primarily antibodies of type 4, which can have very, very dramatic implications about their immune system, in the sense that they might actually, one way you can think about it, they were overexposed to the spike and to the spike proteins, and now next time they're going to see it, their system will tell them, hey, don't react, which can actually lead to more severe illness and higher infectivity rates, which is something that we do see among heavily vaccinated people, especially as the variants change. But unfortunately, these type 4, IgG4 antibodies are also associated with a lot of autoimmune diseases. In fact, there is a whole class of autoimmune diseases that are related to this type of antibodies, and they are also associated with turbo cancers. They're also associated with non-specific impact beyond the tolerant being tolerated to the specific pathogen, they might actually create essentially a shutdown of the immune system. So these are things that are already documented, I think, by at least 3 studies, separate studies, and people are just waving them off and don't stop it to even understand what do they mean. So yeah, I think as I mentioned before, the problem is that we don't have fact-based discussions anymore. There are many concerning facts that are being actively ignored, and anybody with a basic scientific sense and with the notion that, hey, we first need to cause no harm,
Right.
You cannot be, stay kind of oblivious to okay, this is very concerning. You have to actually check this. You have to conduct studies of understanding better what is going on here, how our immune system is being affected by these products, especially if you want to scale that to so many other products. Because I actually suspect that the platform has to do a lot with many of these phenomena that we see.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. We should probably produce the articles for viewers and so forth. I'll ask for that later. I'm not going to do it now. But I think there's actually something else at play here. It's not really a science-y kind of thing. It's not really, almost it's not a matter of right or wrong and proving whether the vaccine handles this group or that group. I think there's really a category error, a category mistake level. It's almost it's a moral issue that things got turned upside down, and all kinds of things that had never been. It was almost like going, I don't know if you're familiar with Alice in Wonderland, through the looking glass. Almost if we'd gone through the looking glass, and vaccines which had been given prior to an illness, you take your flu shot before the illness. We never had flu shot boosters for that flu. So we're having a whole bunch of things. We're being told stuff that we've never been told before, and it's not really a matter of science, it's a matter of dictate. And it has a lot more in common, with the Red Queen and the Mad Hatter, or the Wizard of Oz, or whatever, whatever fanciful figure you want to do that, than it does with science. And they rewrote the concept of herd immunity in Wikipedia and elsewhere in the CDC to have it be a vaccine immunity. This is nothing. This is not the case. They're abrogating science, and they're not even touching it. And the concept of treating kids at all with this formulation, when they were at zero risk, they were at literally 1 to 110,000 or 1 to 100,000 relative risk to an 85-year-old was a criminal. So I think what we're doing a lot of times these days is not science at all. It's social contagion. It's social control. We see this with kids coming in and saying they feel funny and then getting winding up having sexual surgery. We are seeing things that have nothing to do with science, nothing to do with the data. Even if you find the data that shows this and this and this about those type of surgeries, or this and this and this about this vaccine, I think our problem with dealing with this on a science basis is that people have, it's kind of like have sword fights, and they throw out this study versus that study. And I think the whole thing has to be with a mess that there's no such thing as a booster to a virus that's long gone. The COVID-19 has not existed in that form for 4 years. The Omicron is not a dangerous, it's not necessarily even related to SARS-CoV-2, and we have a so-called booster, and then we have a bivalent, really, which is, I think, a self-serving item, to kind of fall into kind of put their nose under the tent of the EUA in order to have, another vaccine product without having had any phase 1, 2, 3, or trials and safety standards, which usually take 5 to 7 years for a vaccine. And so I think this was a kind of a huge charade. And I think it comes down to a moral level and a lot of lying that happened for self-serving interest. But, who knows?
Yeah, the way maybe just to kind of relate to some things you just shared, often over the last 3 or 4 years, I was told that I'm a dissenting voice against the mainstream. And my response was that I refuse to be called a dissenting voice. I actually feel that the voices that others, and myself included, but probably much more talented and prestigious people than me, have expressed over the last 4 years are essentially the mainstream up to 4 years ago.
Right.
And the dissenting is happening by the regulatory authorities, by some of the scientists, and they are descending from well-known facts for decades, basic facts about biology, basic facts about safety, basic facts about regulatory policy. So, for example, it's a fundamental fact that when you approve a product, a pharmaceutical product, especially a biologic, you approve it with the manufacturing process. And that's a regulatory principle that was written based on one of the most significant disasters that we had about safety, with respect to safety of vaccines, where basically the polio vaccine, I think it was back in the 60s, was they changed the production, the manufacturing process, but they didn't actually regulated it, and that caused like major injuries, because the vaccine was supposed to contain killed virus, and the virus was actually not killed appropriately, and then the children got polio from the vaccine. So as a result of that, this has become like a fundamental principle in regulatory policy, that you have to approve and regulate, and the clinical trial has to test not only the product, but also the manufacturing process. And if you change the manufacturing process, you need to run more trials. Okay. Now, that's another fact that people are not aware of. Most people that I tell them this fact, that the fact I'm going to share, are shocked. But this is a fact. The mRNA vaccine of Pfizer was never tested in the clinical trial. And the reason is that the manufacturing process that was used to manufacture the vaccines that were given in the trial is fundamentally different than the manufacturing process that was used to manufacture the commercial vaccines that were given to the population, in a very fundamental way. And moreover, we now know by at least, from studies by at least 3 or 4 groups, that when you sequence the vaccines that were given to the population, you actually see that they are contaminated with DNA at levels that are well beyond the permitted regulatory limits, and to the extent that they raise serious safety concerns and also efficacy concerns, right? So this is yet another example of not only facts that are being ignored, but basic principles, well-known, well-established principles of regulatory policies and regulatory practices, and how you run clinical trials, and how you make decisions about approving new treatments and new therapeutics, that was completely thrown off the window. And if someone would say to me that you had to throw it off the window to give it to very old people that are at high risk from COVID, and you also let them know and had an informed consent that they're taking all of these extra risks that maybe usually you don't take, I would probably think that this is a wrong decision, definitely retrospectively, but I would think that prospectively it's a legitimate decision.
Right.
But to do that for everybody, including children, including young people, and scale it and like give it to billions of people, without following basic principles that are well accepted, are completely mainstream, that are written in all the books, I've
gone over this 1,000 times.
That's like
Dr. Fauci,
unexplainable. Right?
Dr. Fauci, I think in 2005, he was on I don't know, some kind of talk show, and a caller called in and says, they were talking about influenza shots, and it was this season's flu, whatever it was. It wasn't one of the major ones, but the caller said, "I just already had the flu. Should I go get the flu shot?" He's like, "Yeah, you should never get the flu shot after you've had the illness. There's no point in that. You have perfect immunity from the virus itself. There's no reason ever to get." He goes on like that. And it's like, well, dude, what happened to that guy? What did you do with him? Like
that's exactly my point. Like, I think that we are seeing over the last 3 years things that are mainstream being defined as fringe, dissenting. Like, I reject that. I
But
claim, I assert, and I will insist that the voices that colleagues of mine and myself have voiced throughout the last 3-4 years are the mainstream.
right.
This is the mainstream.
It's
What is
incredible.
dissenting, unfortunately, and where the dissent came from the regulatory organizations, the governments, some of the scientists that were supposedly representing the mainstream, but actually they didn't. It's not the mainstream.
Yeah, no, they
It's
had
actually against the mainstream
yeah,
up
they
to
had
3 years ago, 4 years ago.
strange complicity in this. I have an article at Brownstone about Dr. Fauci's own gain of function. There was a certain amount of complicity, as you probably know, of the U.S. involvement, NIAID's involvement in working on the coronavirus, both here and in
What do
gain
you
of
mean?
function.
They funded it.
Yeah, both in the United States
A certain
and
amount. They actually funded
yeah,
this
and
program.
funded the kind of, it was probably like a little tinged in CIA aspect of going over there to Wuhan so they could have, feet on the ground and watch the Wuhan lab. And the Wuhan, WIV was interested in our better techniques. And so they co-opted Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance crowd. And, Peter Daszak and Zhengxi Li, or Zhengli Shi, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, they go back into the caves, another decade prior, and seem to have a very close relationship, working one. Now, she disavowed that she was the source of the so-called leak or whatever, but one way or another, our fingerprints are on it, and I'm sure there was a little bit of a frisson, a little bit of chill going down that Dr. Fauci's spine. So he changed from being the 2005 Fauci to the other one, and it became a clamping down. And I think they scurried in ways to contain this. And I don't know. I mean, I think they exaggerated the severity for whatever intent and purpose. I think some of it was political because it became a very useful modality to get mail-in ballots. But I think it was part of a different thing from regular medical treatment. I think this kind of the doctor-patient relationship was thrown out the window. No pun intended. The baby with the bathwater in this case, and individuals are sacrificed for political goals and for economic goals and for all kinds of future benefits, and it's a sadness. So I think I agree on this. Now I just want to backtrack slightly for our audience. Your knowledge of this topic is reasonable, and it sounds comprehensive, and you have a good array of the facts. But you are not a medical professor. You are a professor at MIT. Can you maybe touch on how your field either permitted you or allowed you to get a different perspective, maybe cleaner, devoid of some of the conflicts, and what happened to those within the medical field who might not have had your kind of external observer quality?
Yeah, so first, I would argue that I think that in order to understand safety of pharmaceutical products, you need a multidisciplinary kind of approach to do that. Like, you cannot just rely on being a medical professional. That brings some aspects that are relevant, of course, but it's not even clear to me that these are the core aspects. So you need to really bring together issues like, of course, the clinical aspects. You need to have epidemiological aspects. You need to understand manufacturing. You need to understand risk, and you need to understand data, and then you need to have common sense and be a scientific thinking, right? So my training is in operations research, which is a discipline that basically is about building models and using data to understand complex systems of different kinds, and be able to leverage data and modeling to understand how you should best operate them, how you should make optimal decisions, how you should deal with uncertainty, and how you should think about risk and safety. And this methodology has been applied to many application domains. It has been applied to optimize cancer treatment. For example, you can sort of take the cancer radiation, and you can optimize the angles and the location of the different beams that you're using to radiate the person, a sick person, to maximize the amount of radiation on the cancerous tissues and minimize the radiation on healthy tissues. You can apply this to build epidemiological models to forecast how viruses will evolve, to understand manufacturing process, to understand anomalies in manufacturing process, to analyze data at scale. So I came to this from that angle, and also with some practical experience of thinking about risk from age of 18, because I spent almost 12 years in the military as an intelligence officer. So my thinking is very much oriented by understanding complex systems, understanding risk, and understanding how you can use data and models to inform decisions of different types. And in this case, understanding how you make decisions, how you understand the data, and what is the level of risk versus what is the what are the potential benefits, and how you should interpret the data that is coming at you, is something very much up my alley. Clearly, in order to do that, you need to learn the context, and that's why you read and you educate yourself. But I would argue that it's probably easier to understand the epidemiological aspects, the clinical aspects, and other relevant aspects, and marry them with the data than to go the other way around, where basically people that have maybe expertise as clinical doctors, but have no expertise about how to interpret the data and how to think systematically about complex decision making.
Right.
And I would argue that it's actually harder to get training on that, or at least you need to make the effort to do that. And I think that actually most doctors don't have time. Most medical doctors.
No, I'm kind of.
I actually have been working with medical doctors for the last 18 years, and some of them have very good intuitions, and some of them are extremely smart, and they are very, very good system thinkers. But if you actually think about how medical doctors are trained, that's something that is not included in the training of medical doctors. That there are individual doctors that were able to acquire some additional skill sets, and either formally or informally, that are able to kind of bring to bear understanding of data to inform what they're doing. But by and large, the medical training of doctors does not include that, and I think that's often a problem, right? That's actually something to think about, of how you fundamentally change the training of medical professionals, because going forward, data is going to be more central, right? So
it's not going to get better before it gets worse. Medical schools, I only wish they would get just to the level of ignorance that is standard. I think there's actually a fair amount of regression because of DEI and whatever other initials you come up with, ESG or QPY or XYZ. But it's like there's a lot of regression in the medical school. So they're changing the courses, they're changing the entrance requirements because people are having a hard enough time with that which was there. So good luck to everyone. After this current generation.
But the point is, I just want to emphasize, the point is, in order to analyze and understand these issues, you need to bring together expertise and perspectives from different.
No, I totally agree.
And that's something that was missing, because to some extent, often people would dismiss opinions just because, you don't have the label of a virologist or a medical doctor or epidemiologist. And I think that this is very wrong way to think about this. But whenever someone is using these arguments, you should be very, very worried that they don't have a substantive argument to counter the data that is put, or the argument that is put in front of them, and they revert to classify someone and dismiss them by affiliation. Frankly speaking, even patients, I would argue that patients often are in the best position to make the decision about themselves, and they need to be provided the information, and they should apply their judgment and their kind of pros and cons, or benefits and risks. And I think that in most cases, the patient knows best what is.
Well, absolutely. I mean, nobody can figure out their own paradigm. I mean, somebody else's paradigm as well as they themselves can. And a lot of times, you have to make a choice. It's very simple things. Sometimes, it's a matter of a very trivial level whether you're going to cast somebody's foot or not. It depends what kind of activity and whether they want it, how well they've done, their age and so forth. But, as far as, more advanced decisions, if somebody has a prostate cancer at age 80, you may treat it, you may not treat it. And a lot of it has to do with other illnesses they might have, what their tolerance for medication is, whether they, and blah, blah, blah. I don't want to go into that. But you have to weigh these things. And ultimately, the patient has to make the decision because you're not doing it. I think a fair amount of problems with medicine in general, is that it sees itself as paternal, as a father figure, so forth, dictating whether the kid can go out that night or whatever. And they don't give the full kind of agency to the patients themselves. But on a societal basis, when we have people like Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins running things, I think it's far magnified because they're treating the whole population as if they're toddlers, and on a intelligence level. And as far as your systems analysis, the most telling, horrible, very, very, very bad quote from Dr. Collins just the other day was that he put infinite weight on eliminating the COVID vaccine from the population. A, which is impossible, and B, which is like an absurdly stupid thing to say, and so cloistered in his self-righteous knowledge, which obviously is contradictory because he has no reason to be self-righteous, because his knowledge is silly. This thing's going to penetrate and burn through the population, and frankly, they already seen the Diamond Princess do it in a perfect experiment. Isolated on the ocean, 3,711 patients or people, and basically nobody had died by the time they put all the constraints on. It's an absurdity, and this kind of like, we're going to kill this, get rid of this virus by having everyone be locked down an infinite weight and not considering any other economic factors. It's a horrible malfeasance, and I'm just I just don't even know why nobody has paid any penalty or price for this.
Yeah, I think that partially the refusal to think about personalized decision making is that when you personalize this, you actually hand, rightly so, the decision rights into the hands of the patient and in consultation with their private physician, and they didn't want to do that, and they don't want to do that when it comes to vaccines and maybe other things that there's a great there's a very concerning trend that basically sees future democracies as something that is being centrally controlled, and instead of emphasizing the individual freedom to make choices, it emphasizes the wisdom of the government to know what is best for everybody, and basically have enforcement mechanisms to impose its will on people. And so that's kind of definitely something very concerning. And the other thing that is concerning is, one of the reasons why people kind of bought into lockdowns or were able to rationalize lockdowns, although there's also even a problem with that line of argument, but it has to do with what are your metrics? What metrics are you managing? If your only metric you manage is the number of COVID cases, or directly COVID-related issues, and you're not thinking about health holistically and sort of the implications of health, and you don't think in a personalized way, right? Then you get very, very quickly to something that can justify anything. Right. And actually, we see that now, right? Like let's just take the discussions around climate. And again, I'm not even getting into the scientific debates about the facts and what are the facts and what are the what are plausible. I'm just looking on the metric. The metric is reducing CO2. So now, what is the problem with that metric? The problem with that metric is one-dimensional metric that doesn't have anything to do with human and people's well-being. So if your only goal is to reduce CO2 in the world, right? That's kind of what you manage. You can justify anything. Right, like you essentially assuming that any measure, any intervention is okay because you are not having any metrics to measure other impacts that can have on human health. And by the way, you also, global climate change, again, it's against personalization. It's against, okay, maybe there's a problem in this area of the world, but another problem in that area of the world, right? Like it's a unified one metric kind of effort that can lead to, again, it's even before we get into the debate on the science, right? I'm just saying that conceptually, this is already a major red flag that basically, which has a major analog, very, very strong analog with what we've seen in COVID, which was, again, global pandemic. And the metric is stop infections, right? We have to reduce infections. I mean, the parallels are very striking here. And I think we have similar reasons to be concerned when you see something like this. And again, that's even before any debate on the science, on the facts.
No, I think it's very scary times, and people have gotten this, ability to make people do stuff. It's like I think power is an intoxicant, and there's an old expression that politics is Hollywood for ugly people, and so if you're a beautiful person, you go, I don't know, you become Tom Brady or Giselle or an actress or whatever, but otherwise you get this moment of fame and people are listening to you all of a sudden, and you just want to keep that going, and so you keep making more and more dictates and so forth that people will follow, and they follow up on each other, and you stay in the spotlight. I think this is kind of the Fauci syndrome, and we'll see it obviously with things like climate and whatnot. I mean, it's really an absurdity because things have there's I always ask people who are into climate stuff, well, give me like 5 parameters by which I can measure your claims, or do me a favor, just define climate change. All the people who harangue me over this, I've had Dick Lindzen on, who's formerly of MIT, but and they can't define climate change, let alone, so we're supposed to fix the problem you can't define. B, they can't give any parameters by which we can see whether they are actually on target. There's all kinds of pollution of terminology. Getting back to COVID, I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but this whole concept of what a COVID case was. A case used to be somebody who had an illness. That was a case. But then you define anybody who has a positive test. These tests are somewhat meaningless, especially if you already had the illness or whatever. Anyway, so I kind of want to segue into kind of MIT. MIT stands last word letter stands for technology. And, I applied and got into MIT 1,000 years ago. I followed it somewhat. I lived nearby, and I've always had kind of a very fond sensibility about MIT. And a lot of this is somewhat inverted. We expect that MIT to kind of, not just follow science, but see the absurdity of a statement like following the science, and come up with other rationales. But frankly, MIT is populated by human beings. They have emotions, they have feelings. How has MIT kind of weathered the first storm of COVID, and how is it weathering the later storms of free speech on campus, intimidation, and coercion of thought?
Well, I mean, okay, without getting into too many details, I think that MIT, like many other universities, forced vaccination on its community, including young students, including the booster. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the future will bring about this in terms of their, whether some of their students or former students would see them liable for damages that were caused by the fact that they had to vaccinate. I think it was not the best decision to say the least. But to some extent, it maybe represents a trend that is maybe broader than MIT, but kind of the leaders and maybe the institutions, the elite universities in the US, are being driven mostly by how are they going to be perceived, and not by aspiring to not only take moral principles, but perhaps really focus on what I believe is their mission, to be excellent in research and education. And what we've seen over the last 6 months is maybe another example of that. And again, people are using the freedom of expression as a way to excuse the fact that MIT has normalized over the last 6 months direct support in the October 7 events, including celebration on October 7 itself, um, and as well as multiple and repeated violations of its own rules. Um, so, to me, the issue is not about freedom of expression. Um, and by the way, it's not also about diversity and DEI. It's really about what the institute is about and what is the mission of the institute. If the mission of the institute is first and foremost excellence in research and education, that's why I believe 99% of the people that come every day to campus and belong to this community, that's why they came, to do great work in learning and doing research and discovering knowledge, inventing, and so forth. So if we accept that, then everything else should be measured as to whether it enables or inhibits
Mhm.
the ability of the organization to pursue its mission. So why do I think that the freedom of speech is critical for universities? It's not necessarily because it's a divine moral value. It is, but it's an important moral value. But frankly speaking, I think that freedom of expression is absolutely necessary for being able to do excellent research and excellent learning.
That is science right there.
That's like absolute. By the way, so is diversity. Diversity is a major enabler for excellence. But
Well,
when I say that, I don't mean narrowly define diversity. I mean diversity broadly defined. But the way to think about diversity is not as a goal by itself, but it should be thought about in the context of universities as a way to enable your mission.
right.
And,
Well, you'd have to define diversity.
to me, we start to have problems when we deviate from this mission.
Right.
And here's the other thing that I would like to say. So when you think about freedom of expression as an enabler for excellence in teaching and research, um, one thing that you need to say, okay, if someone is doing research, they should be able to claim any research claim that they want to claim and let it be judged by their peers and evaluated, right? What has happened on campus had nothing to do with freedom of expression, but really had to do with really violating the sense of emotional and physical safety of
It's intimidation.
that wanted to come to campus and be able to do research and education like it's supposed to do. So I personally always emphasize in my discussions within MIT and outside MIT the fact that what matters here is not what people think and say. I think there are limits to that. Like I still believe that supporting and calling for genocide is a crime. This is not free speech. It's really violence. It's part of violence. But regardless, I think that if let's just take an outrageous a claim that we've heard, that Israel is currently committing genocide in Gaza. Personally, I think it's a non-factual, to say the least, claim. I think that people should have the right to make that claim, but they should have this right in the place and location that doesn't compel people that don't want to engage in that discussion to have to listen to that. So my point is, people don't want to have discussions about politics at MIT. They should be allocated space and time and be able to have whatever debate they want to have there with the people that want to engage with that debate. I don't think that they can force that debate in the central entrance.
Right. Well, this is the whole thing.
People that don't want to have this debate and just want to do the research have to be compelled to listen to that. And
they're
that's
they're
the point
private
we're trying to make here, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, everything that I said is rooted and formulated and is 100% perfectly aligned and consistent, not only with the rules and regulations of MIT, not only with the definition of harassment of MIT, but also with the definition and in the wording of the freedom of expression statement that the faculty of MIT has recently, in the last about 2 years ago, has voted on. It's all consistent. I'm not suggesting any change in MIT regulations, in its definition of harassment, and in its freedom of expression statement. It's only about following our mission and our own rules, and that takes leadership and principled leadership that I unfortunately, not only MIT, but also MIT has lacked.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. So we're rounding out the hour. I know you got to have a hard stop. So any final words?
I think it's going to be an interesting, the next several years are going to be very, very interesting. I think that we need to understand that we have some global issues. And I think that what we've seen on MIT campus in terms of anti-Semitism and the issues around Israel are actually much broader and deeper. I think that we have really fundamental debates about what are the values and the metrics that should guide us. And I'm optimistic that the majority of people still believe in the basic values and the common sense that really puts individuals in the center and really puts excellence and the aspirations to be excellent, to be fact-based, to be science-based, and to be oriented to really pursue and improve the well-being of people in the world. And I think there are strong forces that deviated from those kind of principles, but I still believe that the majority of the population in the world and the majority of people are going to buy into these principles. And once they understand also or become more aware of the threats that are emerging, I think they're going to act. And I'm going to try to use my voice to make people aware that they need to act.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. You know, I do think, as I was saying to Dr. Bhattacharya at his lecture at MIT, you know, I think that people can fall into traps, but hopefully they learn kind of in a generational way. You know, there are lessons of the Vietnam War. There are lessons from this current episode. There are lessons from COVID. You know, how they get taught is another question. That's something we have to work on, giving the word out, and that's hopefully what we're doing today. So one final word, self-plug. I don't have the screen up, but I have a book, Overturning Zika. If you want to help support my podcast and get great people on like Professor Levi, you can go buy it. It's called Overturning Zika. It's on Amazon. It's out in Brazil as well. And this is a topical point because Brazil is cutting down on free speech right now. And my book presents a very different view of the Zika microcephaly pandemic, which is still counted as a real illness constellation, even though it has not replicated has not shown up ever again after this 2015 theoretical formulation, which was a panic. Never, even in that very next year in 2016, there was no microcephaly increase as a result of Zika. I think Zika is a real virus. I think microcephaly is a real issue, very rare. Zika doesn't cause any human problems, and it's a dengue, and dengue never caused any microcephaly. Anyway, that's an interesting story. I hope you go out and buy it, buy multiple copies so you can support this. And I want to thank you for being on. We'll try to have some links for some of the articles you referenced before.
Sure.
Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks. Thank you for inviting me. Have a great day.